Hi, I'm Chloe, and this is my presentation on supporting communication and language development. So, to begin, the age group that I chose is preschool. I just thought it would be the easiest because I work with children between 3 to 4 years of age. And then the domain is language and communication. The purpose of my presentation is to show different ways that educators can help support a child's communication and language development. Using the early learning frame, educators can gain an understanding of the language and communication skills a child may possess. So, a little bit of an overview of language development. During a child's preschool years, they begin to combine sentences and create full sentences. They start to ask questions, mainly simple ones, and then they can get more complex the older that they get. They begin to engage in conversation more. They begin to follow simple instructions. An example of this where if they were asked to go get something, if they were asked to go put their shoes on, to go throw a piece of trash away, they begin to use words to express their feelings. They begin to tell you if they're angry or if they're sad. Their vocabulary becomes significantly greater, so it can actually be about 300 words in their home language. This sometimes doesn't apply for children like dual language learners. They begin to understand positional words like up and down, and then they show interest when participating in an activity. So the subdomains that I chose was vocabulary, and this is where a child understands and uses a wide variety of words for a variety of purposes. Communicating and speaking, child varies the amount of information provided to meet the demands of the situation, and child expresses self in increasingly long, detailed, and sophisticated ways. Three, attending and understanding. This is where a child attends to, understands, and responds to communication and language from others, and child learns from communication and language experience with others. I got this from the Head Start early learning framework. So some differences, some similarities and differences. So I'll start with how children are similar. Children are similar because they all usually progress through the same developmental milestones. So for example, children in the 3 to 5 range, which is the preschool range, should be using over 2 to 3 word sentences. And then in different parts of the world, children in this preschool age range still have the same expected timeline of language and communication development. This is not the case for all children. Some may have delays when it comes to that, but for most children, they are all kind of following the same timeline. So how are they different? So although they have the same expected developmental milestones, they can reach these at different times. This is depending on outside factors or the child. Children can reach these milestones faster or slower. And it also depends on their family. They can be exposed to different amount of words a day, which can affect their progress. Also, the language they may speak may have an effect on if they're like a dual language learner. And depending on the educators for the children, it can play a role in their language development. A study was done that showed the more complex words an educator used, the more complex of words that children would then use as well. This can have an effect on the types of words or sentences certain children can form, so that if they were in like an early learning program early on in their life and their educator used pretty complex words, they could be a little further ahead than the rest of their peers who maybe didn't have access to that. So I did a little quote, and it's, we've learned that children's understanding of complex language correlates with how much complex language they are exposed to in preschool. And that back and forth conversations where educators use elicitations and extensions help to promote vocabulary growth. So language and literacy development can be affected by many different factors. For example, this research shows that depending on the amount of complex language they are exposed to, it can have a lasting impact on their vocabulary growth. So it says growing up in a low SES family does not cause children to have lower vocabularies. Instead, children from low SES families often have fewer opportunities to build their language skills. So for example, parents in low SES families often have less free time after work, and many child care centers that are less costly also have larger classroom sizes. This means that there are often fewer opportunities for one-on-one interactions. So this shows that children from low SES families may find themselves behind other children in their age range. So I have some strategies for supporting language development. One strategy to support language development are elicitations. Elicitations are questions that teachers can ask. These are actually open-ended questions that help encourage children to talk. They give them the opportunity to practice responding. So, for example, while reading a story, you can ask the child, why do you think the character did that? This allows children to respond, but to also learn how to recall moments in the story. This specific strategy aligns with the subdomains communicating and speaking in emergent literacy. Another strategy is by singing songs and rhyming. Songs actually allow the children to memorize words and things like letters. It allows them to recognize different sounds as well. Although it may be too complex, it will help them gain knowledge of syllables. This is the subdomain phonological awareness, but will begin to build things like vocabulary, and it helps children with their listening skills. The next strategy is by using culturally relevant books or songs. This can influence children to actively participate in the books or songs, but also supports comprehension skills in children. It's a great way to also help support dual language learners by using books or songs in their home language. And the last one is by introducing new words that are more complex or uncommon. So, for example, you could say things like, that was unexpected. Unexpected is pretty unfamiliar to children in this age group, or they may just not know what it means. This will give them an opportunity to be curious about it, to ask you questions about it, and then you can help expand on that, and it will help strengthen a child's vocabulary skills, therefore supporting their language development. This is also really good for helping children ask questions about vocabulary words when they don't know a word, because children in this age range do begin to ask a lot of questions and probably will ask what that word means. So, connections to course resources. The first resource I used was the Early Learning Outline Framework. This resource allowed me to see the domains and subdomains that I based this presentation around regarding language and communication. This resource allowed me to understand where children that are in preschool should be developmentally when it comes to their language development. And below I just have a picture attached of an example of one of the goals from the subdomains that all are surrounded by language and communication. So the next connection that I made was for More Than Baby Talk. This article gave great information on strategies to help children strengthen their language development. Although the article was geared more for infants and toddlers, it also can be used for children in the preschool range. It allowed me to see what ways I can support children in their language development and how I can implement certain strategies into my curriculum. And then to the right, I kind of have one of the tips that they read it again. This just shows how repetition is super important for children and can actually help them develop their language skills. And my conclusion is just, as children grow throughout life, they hit many different milestones, and language and communication are super important aspects of growing in a child's life educationally. There's many strategies to help children grow stronger in these areas and hit their developmental milestones. And then each child may move at a different pace than others. Some may fall more behind or some may be ahead. But overall, children usually reach the same stepping stones around the same time. I was able to gather a lot of information about ways that I can support children in the preschool range to help them boost their language and communication skills. So hopefully this may help. And then my last page are all of the references that I used for this assignment. Thank you.